again, before tayo mag-proceed, okay, with the details ng ating financial statement. Okay, theoretically guys so di pa ako magbibigay ng mga example dito ng balance sheet, ng income statement, but theoretically discuss natin siya. But before we proceed with other statement, let's just elaborate yung additional nating statement na tinatawag nating additional statement of financial position. Kasi so, for some others, they may not be familiar with this six financial statement, but since meron na tayong, under na tayo ng revised conceptual framework, we must understand what's the purpose of having this particular statement. So, sabi dito, an additional statement of financial position is presented as at the beginning of the preceding period when an entity, so, kailangan nating i-present ang ating additional statement of financial position containing the beginning balances of balance sheet, okay, when an entity applies an accounting policy retrospectively. So, ngayon kasi, kapag daw nagkaroon ng changes sa accounting policy, ang adjustment natin niya ay retrospective. Guys, when we say retrospective, pabalik. Okay, prospective kasi, nag-a-adjust tayo from present to the future. So, yung required na, ay yung regular na adjustment. But, pag sinabi kasing retrospective, nakapag-report na tayo this year, babaguhin natin last year. Okay? So, possible ba yun? Yes, possible yan. Ang ginagawa natin, na-adjust natin yan sa ating capital or sa corporation side retained earnings. So, it applies an accounting policy retrospectively. So, then it also makes a retrospective statement of items in financial statement. Number 1 pertains to the changes in accounting policy. Number 2 naman, it pertains to the changes in accounting estimate or so yung mga kailangan ng retrospective restatement. Okay? So, pag sinabi ng retrospective restatement, may binabago tayong figures pabalik. Okay? So, most likely we are changing that as well on our retained earnings. So, then number 3, we reclassify item in its financial statement. Nagkaroon ng reclassification, let's say, sa investment side, they classify the corporate, for example, may mga bonds sila, bonds payable. Before they are classifying their bonds as corporate bonds. But ngayon, yung mga bonds pala na yun, convertible bonds na sila at the present time. So, we have to retrospect yung reclassification natin dyan. Okay, so is that valid? Yes, based on PS1, that is valid. So, overall, the effect of the event to the statement of financial position as at the beginning of the preceding period is material. So, again, the very reason as well why we have this one, because these particular instances, yung 1, 2, 3, okay, material sila. Since material, ano ba pag sinabi material? It really affects the decision of the user. So, since it affects the decisions of the users, we must present that on our financial statement. Okay? But ngayon, since nangyari na nga, na-present, kasi parang, sir, bakit ganun? Meron na tayong final na yung financial statement na ginawa natin before, bakit babaguhin? So, ngayon, instead of changing that, we must add na lang additional financial statement. Okay? And what that is the additional statement of financial position pertaining to the beginning balance, ina-adjust natin yung mga beginning balance. Okay? So, that's the reason why we have this additional statement. So, let's proceed now with the regular 5 statements na na-mention natin kanina sa complete set of financial statements. So, for the statement of financial position, we are following the concept of aggregation or classification. Okay? So, that here, we are classifying yung ating mga assets based on similar items, like if they are under current assets or non-current assets, if they are under current liabilities or non-current liabilities. But sir, pwede bang mag-present as current and non-current? O kaya hindi na lang ilagay as ganun? Yes, pwede. Based on PS1, pwede ang presentation natin is a classified financial statement of financial position o kaya naman unclassified. Pag sinabing classified financial position, guys, ang presentation natin ng ating balance sheet ay nakadepende kung current or non-current. Naka-classify siya as current and non-current. Let's say we are classifying our asset as current and non-current. We are classifying as our liabilities if current and non-current as well. So, that is a classified statement of financial position. When we say unclassified naman, wala siyang classification or wala siyang presentation kung current or non-current. So, sir, paano natin i-present yung mga list or order ng mga assets and liabilities sa ating balance sheet? So, in that case, ang ating presentation ay based on liquidity. When we say based on liquidity, kung sino yung pinakamabilis na item na maging cash. And alam natin, so kung sino yung pinakamabilis maging, yung item pinakamabilis maging cash, syempre, number 1 na dyan yung cash. So, nasa bungad na item dyan, cash. Particular, next one, siguro possible, receivable, possible, next one, inventory. Most likely pa rin naman, ang mga nauuna, current asset. Kasi mas mabilis na nagiging cash ang current asset. But, in this one, wala na siyang classification na pinapresent natin na in particular na current or non-current. Dito, lahat ng items ng asset nandyan, lahat ng items ng liability nandyan. Walang classification. But, yung presentation based on liquidity. Again, when we say liquidity, gaano kabilis nagiging cash ang isang item. It's separate from from the concept of realization. Ang concept liquidity, yung gaano siya kabilis naging cash para may pambayad natin or magamit pa natin. Okay? So, that's the presentation of our balance sheet. So, for the example, okay, or practical illustration for this one, I'll give you a separate video from the YouTube. Okay, so you could understand it in details pa. Okay, so as I've said kanina, kapag ang ating balance sheet ay classified as current and non-current, so ito ang ating criteria. So, for an asset to be classified as current asset, okay, it should these are the following requirements. Okay, number 1, it expects to realize the asset or intends to sell or consume it in its normal operating cycle. So, masasabi natin current ang isang asset kapag mabebenta natin yan or magagamit natin yan on the normal operating cycle. Okay, and usually nga, diba, and the normal operating cycle of the company is 1 year. So, ibig sabihin lang number 1 dyan, kapag magagamit or mabebenta natin siya for a year. Sa loob ng 1 taon, current asset siya. Okay? So, like inventory, diba? Most likely naman, mabebenta natin yan sa loob ng 1 taon. Office supplies, means gagamitin din natin for a year. Okay? Then, number 2, it holds the assets primarily for the purpose of trading. So, pag sinabing trading kasi, nagbebenta. Okay? So, pasok siya as 1 year at the normal operating cycle. Number 3 naman, it expects to realize the asset within 12 months after the reporting period. So, as Presley sinabi, na kapag ang isang asset daw expected ma-realize for 12 months or even less, current asset siya. Then, number 4, the asset is cash or cash equivalent unless the asset is restricted from being exchanged or used to settle liability for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, pag sinabing cash and cash equivalents, guys, kasi pag ayan yung mga cash at malapit na maging cash. Okay? So, may mga investment particular, guys, kasi kapag nasa intermediate accounting 1 na kayo, okay, there are items of assets na hindi pa siya cash ngayon, but malapit na siya maging cash and almost cash na siya. Okay, so in that case, nagkakaroon tayo ng tawag na cash equivalence. Okay? Then, kapag ang cash and cash equivalence daw presented as current asset, but merong mga cash kasi tayo, guys, na hindi natin pwede i-present as current asset in a way that they are restricted to be used pa ng 1 taon. So, let's say, meron tayong security deposit sa isang sa bangko. Yung security deposit na yun, cash natin, yun eh. But, the bank is not allowing us to withdraw that. So, let's say they have the rule na after 2 years pa natin mawi-withdraw yun or after 2 years na mabayaran natin ang utang natin sa kanila. In that case, we cannot present that as part of our current asset. But, instead, we'll present that as non-current. Bakit? We are not expecting to use the asset or use that particular cash for a year. Diba? More than a year nga. So, it's not under current classification anymore or criteria. Okay, so these are the following instances wherein we could say that that a particular asset is under current assets. The next one, current liability. So, same way naman with the current asset, dito naman pag-usapan natin liability. So, it almost have the same criteria. Okay, so current liability, if we expect that to settle in its normal operating cycle, or particularly in regular 1 year. So it holds the liability primarily for the purpose of trading. So let's say regularly nagbibili tayo sa mga supplier. So regularly, so kumbaga ang purpose natin primarily focusing on the trading. Number 3 naman, the liability is due to be settled within 12 months after the reporting period. So, expressly, alam natin na within 12 months, masasettle natin na ating payable. So, we could classify that as current liabilities like accounts payable, accrued expense, salaries payable, di ba? So, mga yan, utilities payable. So, example yan ng current liabilities because we are expecting to settle that within 12 months. Then lastly, the entity does not have an unconditional right to defer settlement of the liability for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, ngayon sa number 4, ibig sabihin lang yan, walang option si client, okay, or si company to set or to extend the grace period ng kanilang utang, okay, but to settle it ngayon, okay? Kumbaga, meron ng demand payment So, kailangan na nilang i-settle yan. In that case, we could consider that current liability kasi it could be settled for less than a year. Okay?